Have you ever noticed how the Western world has reduced the concept of discipline to a mere matter of willpower? Wake up earlier, work harder, resist temptations. All through sheer force of will, it's a perpetual battle against yourself, a constant internal division where one part of you commands while another reluctantly obeys. No wonder most of our attempts at discipline collapse within weeks. What if I told you that this entire understanding of discipline is fundamentally flawed? That there exists a level of discipline so profound, so transformative, that most people aren't even ready to comprehend it, let alone embody it. This is not about new productivity hacks or morning routines. This is about an entirely different paradigm of what discipline actually is. A paradigm that was embodied most perfectly in feudal Japan by a man named Miyamoto Musashi. I remember meeting a high-powered executive who came to me after burning out, despite implementing every cutting-edge productivity system available. He had been waking at 4 a.m., following elaborate morning routines, tracking his habits meticulously, everything the modern discipline gurus prescribed. And yet, despite his outward success, he confessed to feeling perpetually exhausted and strangely empty. "I can force myself to do anything," he told me, "but it's always a fight. There's always resistance. I thought discipline would eventually become easier, but the battle never ends." What this man had encountered, without realizing it, was the fundamental limitation of the Western conception of discipline. The belief that true discipline is about forcing yourself to do what you don't want to do. But in the Japanese tradition, particularly as embodied by Musashi, discipline isn't about internal warfare. It's about internal unification. It's not about one part of you controlling another, but about transcending the very division that makes such control necessary. This is the level of discipline that almost no one in the modern world is ready for, because it requires abandoning our most cherished illusion, the separate self that exercises discipline. Miyamoto Musashi, often remembered simply as history's greatest swordsman, was so much more than that. He was the living embodiment of a discipline so profound that most people can't even conceptualize it. Undefeated in over 60 duels, Musashi didn't achieve this through superior techniques alone. What set him apart was a quality of presence, of undivided attention that his opponents couldn't match. While they were caught in the gap between thought and action, between intention and execution, Musashi moved as one unified being. There was no separation between the seer and the seen, the doer and the deed. This state, which the Zen tradition calls no mind, is not some mystical achievement. It is the natural condition of a being who has seen through the illusion of the separate self that needs to exercise discipline over its unruly parts. What makes Japanese discipline, as exemplified by Musashi, so different from what most of us understand as discipline? The difference is fundamental. For most of us, discipline means adhering to rules, following routines, meeting standards, all through conscious effort and willpower. It's inherently dualistic. There's the part of you that knows what should be done, and the part that needs to be controlled to do it. This creates an inevitable internal division, a constant battle that can never truly be won because the very structure of this kind of discipline reinforces the division it claims to overcome. Musashi's approach was radically different. In his Dokodo, The Way of Walking Alone, written a week before his death, he offers a glimpse of this different understanding. Accept everything just the way it is. This isn't passive resignation, it's radical honesty about what is. Before you can respond effectively to any situation, you must first see it clearly, without the distortion of how you think it should be. The same applies to yourself. Before you can act from genuine discipline rather than its performance, you must first accept yourself exactly as you are, including all the aspects that seem to resist discipline. This acceptance isn't the end point, it's the necessary beginning of authentic transformation. Without it, you're simply layering new facades over unacknowledged truths, creating more internal division, not less. I want to pause for a moment and ask something I've been contemplating deeply. When did you first notice the exhaustion that comes from treating discipline as an internal war? That moment when, despite all your achievements and efforts, you realized that the constant battle of forcing yourself was creating a deep fatigue no amount of rest seemed to cure. I receive messages from people who have spent decades practicing discipline as self-coercion. They've built impressive lives through sheer willpower, but inside, they feel hollow, divided, perpetually at war with themselves. The most painful part is that many believe this internal battle is what discipline is supposed to be, that the exhaustion they feel is simply the price of achievement. If something in this resonates with your experience, share in the comments. My understanding of discipline began to shift when I realized that your insight might be exactly what someone else needs to question their own approach to discipline. Each honest comment becomes a doorway for others to step through. Now, let's continue exploring this Japanese level of discipline that transcends our conventional understanding. One of the most profound aspects of Musashi's approach to discipline was his emphasis on unification rather than control. In the Book of Five Rings, he writes, "The way is in training, not in controlling yourself, not in adhering to external standards, but in the direct, embodied practice that gradually eliminates the gap between who you are and what you do." True discipline, in this understanding, is not about becoming something other than what you are. It's about becoming so completely what you already are that there is no remainder, no resistance, no internal division. Consider the difference between a novice swordsman and a master like Musashi. The novice must consciously remember each movement, must force his body to comply with techniques that feel unnatural, must constantly monitor and correct himself. This is discipline, as most of us understand it, effortful, divided, conscious. But the master has so thoroughly integrated the principles of swordsmanship that her movements emerge naturally, without deliberation or effort. There is no gap between intention and action, no delay between seeing and responding. This is not the absence of discipline. It is its highest expression. The discipline has become so complete that it disappears as a separate activity. This quality of unified action is what the Japanese call mushin, literally, no mind. It's not that thinking stops, but rather that the separation between thinker and thought dissolves. Action flows directly from perception, without the intermediary of a controlling self that must force the body to comply. This is the level of discipline that almost no one in our modern world is ready for, because it requires surrendering our addiction to control to the comforting illusion that there is a separate I who can master life through force of will. Musashi embodied this understanding not just in combat, but in every aspect of his life. He lived with extraordinary austerity, not because he was punishing himself or denying his desires, but because he had recognized what was essential and what was merely distraction. His famous motto, "Do nothing which is of no use," wasn't a productivity maxim. It was an expression of this unified consciousness that naturally eliminates the unnecessary without internal conflict. He didn't need to force himself to avoid luxuries or comforts. They simply lost their hold over him as he became increasingly unified in his being. This points to another critical difference between conventional discipline and the Japanese level, exemplified by Musashi: the relationship to desire. In the Western understanding, discipline is often framed as the victory of should over want. You want to sleep in, but you should get up and exercise. You want that dessert, but you should stick to your diet. This creates the perpetual internal division that makes discipline so exhausting. But in Musashi's approach, the very nature of desire is transformed. It's not that he didn't experience desire, but rather that his desires became unified with his deeper purpose. There was no conflict between what he wanted in the moment and what he wanted ultimately, because the separate self that could want something contrary to his true nature had been seen through. This is expressed in another of his precepts from the Dokudo: be detached from desire your whole life long. This isn't a rejection of desire, but a transformation of how desire functions. When you're no longer identified with the separate self that wants this but not that, that clings to pleasure and avoids pain, desire simply becomes a movement of energy within your larger field of awareness. It no longer divides you against yourself. You can recognize a desire without becoming it, without being limited by it. This detachment is not coldness or suppression. It's the freedom that comes from no longer being ruled by the fragmented impulses of the separate self. The implications of this understanding are revolutionary for how we approach discipline in our lives. Instead of trying to force ourselves to adopt better habits through sheer willpower, we might ask, what is creating the internal division that makes force necessary? What if discipline isn't about controlling yourself, but about seeing through the illusion of the separate self that needs to be controlled? What if the ultimate discipline is not the perfection of control, but the transcendence of the very need for control? This is why the Japanese martial arts place such emphasis on practice, keiko, rather than theory or willpower. It's through direct embodied practice that the gap between self and action gradually closes, not by forcing yourself to comply with external standards, but by becoming so intimately familiar with an activity that it becomes a natural expression of your being. This is why Musashi wrote, "The way is in training, not training as we typically understand it, as a means to an end, something we do now to get results later, but training as the direct embodiment of discipline itself, as the arena in which the divided self is gradually unified." There's a story about Musashi that illuminates this understanding. A young samurai once asked him for the secret to his extraordinary swordsmanship. Musashi reportedly replied, "I have eliminated unnecessary movement." The young man, expecting some elaborate technique or spiritual revelation, was disappointed by the simplicity of this answer. But in those few words, Musashi had expressed the essence of true discipline. It's not about adding more control, more effort, more force. It's about eliminating everything that is not essential, everything that creates division and resistance within yourself. And this elimination happens not through suppression or denial, but through the clarity that comes from complete presence. This quality of presence is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the Japanese level of discipline for modern people to grasp. We live in a culture of perpetual distraction, of fragmented attention, of constant mental commentary. The idea of being so completely present with what we're doing that the doer disappears into the doing is almost inconceivable. And yet, this is precisely what Musashi exemplified. Whether wielding a sword, painting a landscape, or writing a treatise on strategy, he brought the same quality of undivided attention to each activity. There was no separation between Musashi the swordsman, Musashi the artist, Musashi the philosopher. There was simply Musashi, responding to each situation with the totality of his being. This is the level of discipline that most people aren't ready for. Not because it's too difficult in the conventional sense, but because it requires surrendering the very identity structure that makes conventional discipline seem necessary. It requires seeing through the illusion of the separate self that needs to be controlled, that exercises discipline over its unruly parts. It requires a radical honesty about the nature of our experience that few are willing to embrace. It's much more comfortable to believe that we just need a better morning routine, a stronger will, a more effective productivity system, anything that allows us to maintain the familiar structure of the controlling self. But Musashi invites us to consider another possibility. What if true discipline isn't about control at all? What if it's about seeing so clearly, being so completely present, that action flows naturally without the intermediary of a controlling self? What if the ultimate discipline is the recognition that there is no separate self who exercises discipline? There is only the seamless flow of life responding to life. This is not some abstract mystical state available only to ancient Japanese swordsmen. We all experience moments of this unified action, in the flow of creative work, in the perfect timing of a conversation, in the absorbed attention of play. These are glimpses of what Musashi embodied as his constant state. Action without a separate doer, discipline without internal division. The path to this level of discipline doesn't lie in more control, more force, more willpower. It lies in the patient cultivation of presence, in the willingness to see through the illusions that create internal division, in the direct, embodied practice that gradually closes the gap between who we are and what we do. This is the invitation that Musashi extends to us across the centuries, not to become superhuman through force of will, but to recognize the wholeness that is already our nature, beneath the fragmentation of the separate self. This Japanese level of discipline is not about achieving more or becoming better. It's about seeing through the very structure that makes such striving seem necessary. It's about recognizing that true discipline is not the perfection of control, but the transcendence of the need for control. It's about discovering the freedom that comes when action flows directly from seeing, without the intermediary of a controlling self. This is the level of discipline that almost no one in our modern world is ready for, not because it's too difficult, but because it challenges our most fundamental assumptions about who we are and how transformation happens. It suggests that the ultimate discipline is not about becoming something other than what we are, but about becoming so completely what we already are that there is no remainder, no resistance, no internal division. Musashi expressed this understanding in his final precept from the Dokodo. In this world, never depend on a single thing. Not even on discipline, as you currently understand it. Not even on the methods and techniques that have brought you this far. Not even on the separate self that believes it needs to exercise discipline. True discipline transcends all these dependencies, revealing the freedom that is your original nature. A freedom not from responsibility, but from the internal division that makes responsibility seem like a burden. This is the invitation that Musashi extends to each of us. To discover a discipline so profound, so transformative, that it dissolves the very problem it was meant to solve. A discipline that doesn't strengthen the separate self through control, but reveals the wholeness that lies beyond separation. A discipline not of achievement, but of revelation. The revelation of what has always been true beneath the fragmentation of the divided self. If these reflections on the Japanese level of discipline have touched something deep within you, something that perhaps you've sensed but haven't been able to articulate, know that it's not by chance that you've encountered these words today. This channel exists as a space where we can question our most fundamental assumptions about transformation and growth, not to arrive at comfortable answers, but to penetrate to the truth that lies beyond comfort. By subscribing, you're not just receiving content, you're joining a community of fellow explorers who are willing to look beyond conventional understanding to discover what it means to live with absolute integrity. I don't offer techniques for self-improvement or strategies for becoming more disciplined in the conventional sense. I offer only an invitation to question deeply, to see clearly, to move beyond the divided self that makes discipline seem like a battle. If this journey of exploration calls to you, activate the bell and join us as we continue to explore the wisdom of masters like Musashi, who point to possibilities beyond our ordinary understanding. Your presence here matters, whether you subscribe or not, but if you choose to walk this path with us, each new video becomes an opportunity to penetrate further into the truth that can set us free from our self-imposed limitations.